Taiwan Strait, 6:22 a.m. The morning the Dragon attempted to seize the Emerald Island by force, China's People's Liberation Army Navy deployed a massive 100-ship fleet to form a total blockade. Destroyers, frigates, and amphibious assault ships moved in synchronized patterns to choke all maritime access. The world watched in stunned silence as the most powerful naval mobilization since World War II unfolded. Beijing's plan was a masterpiece of intimidation, designed to force a surrender before a shot was fired. They believed the sheer scale of their steel wall would keep the United States Navy at a distance. But the Chinese High Command made 4 catastrophic miscalculations that would lead to a maritime massacre. The first mistake was believing that visible surface ships were the only players on the tactical board. While the Chinese fleet dominated the horizon, the deep waters below were already claimed by others. 6 Virginia-class stealth submarines had been loitering in the Strait's thermal layers for over 3 weeks. These silent hunters were integrated into a web of orbital sensors and undersea acoustic arrays. The Chinese sonar operators were confident in their modern hulls, yet they heard nothing but the tide. Beijing assumed that numerical superiority on the surface equaled total control of the theater of war. They did not realize that 100 targets are simply a target-rich environment for a hidden predator. The Chinese flagship, the Type 055 cruiser Nanchang, issued a final warning to Taipei. Surrender your ports and accept our administrative control, or face the total annihilation of your forces. The ultimatum was broadcast on all emergency frequencies, intended to shatter the morale of the defenders. Across the strait, the Chinese sailors stood at their stations, proud of their seemingly invincible formation. They believed their long-range anti-ship missiles and S-400 batteries could intercept any aerial retaliation. The encirclement was perfect, a ring of iron closing around the world's most critical semiconductor hub. But beneath the waves, the American submarine commanders received the ultimate authorization: weapons-free. The second miscalculation was the reliance on active sonar, which acted as a beacon for the hunters. By pinging the water to find threats, the Chinese fleet revealed their exact coordinates to the abyss. The Virginia-class subs utilized passive sonar to map the acoustic signature of every single Chinese hull. They knew which ships were the high-value command centers and which were the auxiliary transports. Each submarine carried a load of Mark 48 ADCAP torpedoes, the world's most lethal underwater weapon. These torpedoes do not hit the ship. They explode underneath the keel to snap the vessel in half. The American crews worked in a silence that was professional, mechanical, and terrifyingly calm. At 6:30 a.m., the first salvo of 48 torpedoes was launched from the silent tubes of the deep. There were no bubbles, no surface disturbances, and no early warnings for the unsuspecting Chinese crews. The Mark 48 swam at over 50 knots, guided by thin wires and advanced internal acoustic brains. They ignored the decoys and the noisemakers deployed by the panicking Chinese destroyer captains. The third mistake was the belief that their anti-submarine warfare suites could handle a saturated attack. As the torpedoes closed the final 1,000 yards, the acoustic sensors on the Chinese ships finally screamed. "Inbound torpedoes! Multiple bearings! We are surrounded!" The radar operators yelled across the Nanchang. The impact was a symphony of destruction that shook the seabed and turned the water into fire. 6 Type 052D destroyers were lifted partially out of the ocean as the torpedoes detonated under their keels. The massive warships buckled in the middle, their structural integrity failing in a matter of seconds. Secondary explosions from their own missile magazines turned the pride of the fleet into burning pyres. Water rushed into the broken hulls, dragging thousands of sailors into the dark depths of the strait. In a single minute, the northern sector of the blockade had been completely and violently erased. The survivors in the water watched in horror as their sister ships vanished into the churning foam. The confusion within the Chinese fleet turned into a state of total, unmanaged panic. The remaining 94 ships began a desperate maneuver to break the encirclement and flee the kill zone. But the American submarines had already anticipated the retreat and moved into the primary exit lanes. Another wave of torpedoes was already being reloaded into the tubes with mechanical, lethal speed. The Chinese commanders realized they were not fighting a surface fleet they could see and target. They were fighting ghosts that lived in the pressure and the cold, striking with absolute impunity. The blockade had become a trap, and the Dragon was finding itself strangled by its own iron ring. The fourth miscalculation was underestimating the integration of American and Taiwanese tactical data. Every move the Chinese ships made was being tracked by Taiwanese land-based radar and fed to the subs. The stealth aspect was not just about the submarines, but the entire network of invisible information. As the Chinese fleet tried to regroup, they were constantly being updated as high-priority targets. The US Navy's undersea dominance was proving that numbers mean nothing if you cannot see the killer. The Strait was now a graveyard of burning oil, twisted metal, and the shattered dreams of invasion. Beijing's 100-ship fleet was shrinking by the minute under the relentless pressure of the deep. The 15 Type 054A frigates in the Eastern Arc tried to deploy depth charges in a blind, frantic defense. They blasted the water with explosives, hoping to hit a target they hadn't even confirmed yet. The explosions were loud, but they were miles away from the actual positions of the American subs. The Virginia-class boats simply dove deeper, slipping into the cold canyons where sonar cannot reach. They waited for the Chinese ships to exhaust their limited supply of anti-submarine ammunition. It was a game of patience, played by masters of stealth against a desperate and amateur enemy. The ocean floor was already littered with the first 10 wrecks of the once mighty Chinese Navy. At 6:42 a.m., the USS North Carolina surfaced its photonic mast to transmit a status update to Pearl Harbor. Northern and eastern sectors neutralized, 24 confirmed kills, no Allied damage, proceeding to final targets. The American public would later learn of the 32-minute massacre that changed the Pacific forever. While the Chinese government tried to censor the news, satellite images of the burning fleet leaked. The world saw the pillars of black smoke rising from the Taiwan Strait, visible even from the moon. The blockade was failing not because of a lack of ships, but because of a lack of awareness. The American submarines had turned a massive fleet into a collection of floating targets. The panic in the southern sector led to a catastrophic collision between two Chinese transport ships. In their haste to escape the unseen torpedoes, they ignored basic maritime navigation and safety. The resulting fire added to the carnage as thousands of troops were forced into the shark-infested waters. The American submarines didn't even have to fire a shot to cause this particular loss of life. Chaos is the greatest weapon of the stealth warrior, and the Chinese fleet was drowning in it. The flagship Nanchang attempted to fire its own anti-submarine rockets, but there was no target. The ocean mocked them with its emptiness, while the torpedoes continued to find their marks. By now, the death toll among the Chinese hulls had reached 30 high-value combatant vessels. Type 055 cruisers, Type 052 destroyers, and Type 071 amphibious docks were all among the dead. The 100-ship fleet was now a disorganized swarm of 65 ships running for their lives. The dream of a bloodless conquest had turned into the most expensive naval defeat in history. The Chinese sailors realized that the Strait of Taiwan was not their playground, but their tomb. Every sonar ping was met with a torpedo, and every maneuver was met with a fresh explosion. The American submarines remained ghosts, never seen, never touched, and never stopped. The tactical situation was now so lopsided that the Taiwanese Navy began to move out of port. They didn't need to lead the fight, but simply to clean up the survivors of the broken blockade. Armed with harpoon missiles, the Taiwanese fast attack boats targeted the crippled Chinese ships. The synergy between the silent American subs and the loud Taiwanese surface fire was total. The Chinese fleet was being hammered from below and from the sides simultaneously in a crossfire. The Great Wall of Steel was crumbling into the sand of the continental shelf as the sun rose. Beijing had sowed the wind of aggression and was now reaping a whirlwind of underwater fire. Inland, the Chinese leadership in Beijing watched the telemetry of their dying fleet in horror. The satellites showed the red icons of their ships turning gray and disappearing from the map. General Chiang Yao-se, who had promised a quick victory, was escorted from the room in disgrace. The perfect plan had lasted less than an hour before it was dismantled by 6 American subs. They had spent billions of dollars on a surface fleet that could not survive a single morning. The realization that the US Navy owned the undersea domain was a bitter and final pill. The blockade was officially over, even if the ships were still burning in the water. At 6:54 a.m., the final 40 ships were either sunk or crippled in the burning water. The ocean was a scene of industrial-scale devastation, covered in a thick layer of bunker fuel. The USS North Carolina and its sister subs began their secondary maneuvers to finish the job. They moved with the grace of sharks, Selecting the last of the command ships for execution, the 32-minute mark had arrived, and the promised retaliation was now complete in full. The Dragon had been blinded, broken, and sent retreating back to the safety of the mainland. The Taiwan Strait remained free, guarded by the silent sentinels of the deep. The survivors of the initial massacre struggled to navigate through a sea of fire and oil. The remaining 60 Chinese vessels attempted to form a desperate defensive perimeter near the coast. They activated every electronic countermeasure in their arsenal, flooding the airwaves with white noise. But the Virginia-class submarines were already repositioning for a final lethal synchronization. The silence of the deep was the only warning before the next wave of Mark 48s was released. Each torpedo was programmed to target the propulsion systems of the fleeing transport vessels. The ocean floor continued to swallow the pride of the People's Liberation Army Navy. At 6:58 a.m., the sky above the strait was filled with the roar of Taiwanese F-16V Vipers. They arrived to provide top cover and target any Chinese vessels attempting a shore bombardment. The coordination between the hidden American subs and the visible air assets was seamless. Chinese anti-air radars were forced to remain active, making them easy targets for harms. Every time a Chinese ship tried to defend against the air, it revealed its position to the sea. The blockade had completely transitioned into a one-sided slaughter of the invading force. The strategic depth of the Chinese Navy was being erased in the span of a single morning. The fifth miscalculation was the belief that the American submarines would run out of ammunition. The Virginia-class boats carried a massive payload, and they made every single torpedo count. They utilized fire-and-forget logic to engage multiple targets across different nautical sectors. By 7:02 a.m., the southern flank of the Chinese retreat had been effectively cut off. A Type 075 landing dock, carrying thousands of troops, took a direct hit to its stern. The massive vessel groaned as it tilted 45 degrees, sliding into the churning gray water. The screams of the lost were drowned out by the thunder of secondary hull collapses. On the bridge of the USS North Carolina, the sonar operators tracked the final 10 targets. The Chinese flagship Nanchang was now dead in the water, its superstructure a twisted ruin. It had been hit by a combined strike from a torpedo and a Taiwanese harpoon missile. The fire on its deck could be seen from the Taiwanese coastline as a beacon of resistance. The Chinese admiral's final transmission was a frantic plea for an immediate air rescue. But the Chinese Air Force had already been pushed back by the arrival of US F-35s. The isolation of the blockade had been turned against the very ones who initiated it. At 7:08 a.m., the American submarines began a cleanup operation of the remaining combatants. They targeted the fuel tenders and supply ships that were essential for any long-term naval presence. Without these vessels, any surviving Chinese warships would be unable to return to port. The water was so thick with wreckage that the submarines had to navigate with extreme caution. They used their high-frequency mine-avoidance sonar to slip through the fields of floating steel. The professionalism of the silent service was the final nail in the coffin of the invasion. The Chinese Navy was experiencing a total collapse of its operational and tactical logic. The sixth miscalculation was the assumption that the world would accept the blockade as a fait accompli. Instead, the rapid destruction of the fleet had galvanized an immediate international response. Japan and Australia had already mobilized their fleets to secure the outer perimeter of the sea. The Chinese leadership in Beijing was now facing a total maritime isolation of their own coast. The economic consequences of the failed 32-minute operation began to ripple through the markets. The Great Encirclement had resulted in the permanent crippling of China's naval prestige. The Emerald Island remained defiant, its ports opening to receive Allied humanitarian support. By 7:15 a.m., the last organized resistance from the Chinese fleet had officially ceased. The remaining 35 ships were either surrendering or drifting helplessly toward the shore. The American submarines remained submerged, their presence still felt, but no longer seen. They had accomplished what an entire surface fleet would have struggled to do in weeks. The rain of fire from the deep had proven the absolute lethality of the stealth sub. The Taiwan Strait was a graveyard of ambition, covered in a shroud of black, oily smoke. The Dragon had retreated to its lair, its wings clipped and its fire extinguished. The seventh and final miscalculation was testing the resolve of the United States undersea fleet. The Virginia-class submarines began their slow egress from the theater, their mission finished. They left behind a transformed geopolitical landscape and a shattered invading force. The total count of confirmed kills stood at 40 major combatants and 20 auxiliaries. Not a single American hull had been scratched during the entire 32-minute engagement. The 100-ship fleet would go down in history as a warning to all future aggressors. Freedom of navigation was restored, written in the debris and fire of a defeated navy. At 7:22 a.m., the sun climbed higher, illuminating the scale of the catastrophic Chinese defeat. The Taiwanese Coast Guard began the grim task of rescuing survivors from the oily water. The victory was absolute, a testament to the power of hidden technology over visible numbers. The world had seen what happens when a blockade meets the silent hunters of the deep. The Chinese flagship Nanchang finally slipped beneath the surface, leaving only a whirlpool. The 32 minutes that changed history had come to a close with a silent American victory. The Taiwan Strait remained free, the Emerald Islands secure, and the submarines remained ghosts. The propaganda machines in Beijing were silenced by the sheer weight of the physical evidence. No amount of doctored footage could hide the hundreds of missing ships and thousands of men. The peaceful reunification narrative had been drowned in the cold waters of the Pacific. The American submarines had saved a democracy without ever showing their faces to the sun. This was the ultimate expression of naval power, to win a war before the enemy knows it started. The 100-ship fleet was a memory, a lesson in the high price of maritime arrogance. The silent service had spoken, and the message was heard by every nation on the planet. Never underestimate the reach of a silent hunter or the lethality of a Mark 48 torpedo. Never believe that a massive surface fleet can protect itself from the horrors of the abyss. The Taiwan Strait is a place of peace only because of those who keep watch in the dark. 60 torpedoes were launched, and 40 major Chinese hulls were sent to the bottom. The 32-minute massacre was the end of an era and the beginning of a new global reality. The Dragon remains on the shore, staring at a sea that it no longer dares to claim. The Emerald Island lives on, protected by the ghosts that roam the deep, silent and ready. The USS North Carolina and its sister ships reloaded their tubes in the quiet of the deep. They moved toward their next patrol sector, their acoustic signatures blending with the wails. There was no parade, no celebration, only the continued execution of the silent watch. The tactical data from the battle was already being analyzed at Pearl Harbor for the next fight. The American submarine force had proven once again why they are the masters of the sea. The blockade was a memory, the fire was a lesson, and the silence was a promise. The world is a safer place because of the steel that sleeps beneath the waves. The people of Taipei woke to the news of the victory, a wave of relief washing over the city. The threat that had loomed for decades had been dismantled in less than an hour of combat. They looked out at the horizon and saw the smoke, a grim reminder of the price of liberty. The international community began the process of imposing final sanctions on the aggressor. The failed invasion was the catalyst for a new era of Pacific cooperation and security. The 100-ship fleet would be studied by military academies for the next 100 years. The victory belonged to the stealth, the technology, and the courage of the silent service. At 7:35 a.m., the last distress signals from the Chinese fleet faded into the static of the morning. The ocean was returning to its natural state, though scarred by the remnants of the dead. The Virginia-class boats were now miles away, invisible and untouchable by any radar. They had performed their duty with a lethal grace that defined the modern age of war. The blockade that was meant to choke a nation had only succeeded in choking its creator. The Dragon had learned that the sea has a memory, and it does not forgive the arrogant. The Taiwan Strait remains an open road, a path for the free, and a tomb for the invaders. The 32-minute mark was the moment the world realized the invincibility of the American sub. The blockade was broken, the fleet was destroyed, and the regional balance was restored. The story of the 100-ship fleet is a story of numbers meeting the reality of the deep. It is a story of fire, of steel, and of the silence that follows a total and final victory. The Emerald Island stands tall, the sun shines on the water, and the ghosts keep watch. Never test the submarines of the United States, for their response is certain and final. The fire has died down, but the lesson of the 32 minutes will last forever in the abyss.